Hi everybody. In this video on evaluating fairness in electoral districting, our focus will be on the Banzhaf Power Index. We'll start with a few definitions. A group of voters who vote the same way is called a coalition. In a voting system, the number of votes necessary to win the election is called the quota. The quota could be a simple majority. In the U.S. Senate, the quota is 60 votes out of 100. To ratify a constitutional amendment in the U.S. requires approval by 3/4 of the states. So the quota in this case would be 38 states. A set of voters with enough votes to determine the outcome of an election is called a winning coalition. So a group of voters who vote the same way is a coalition. And if there are enough votes within a coalition to meet the quota, then that coalition would be called a winning coalition. Here's an example. Suppose there are 3 delegates to a county convention. Abe has 4 votes from his precinct, Ben has 3 votes, and Condi has 1 vote. A simple majority of the votes wins. What is the quota? There are 8 total votes available. Abe's 4, Ben's 3, and Condi's 1. Since there are 8 total votes available, a simple majority would be 5. You take the total number, cut it in half, and then get a little bit more. So a little more than half of 8 would be 5. Let's make a table listing all of the coalitions of voters and designate which of them are winning coalitions. Here's a table of all possible coalitions. So it could be that Abe, Ben, and Condi all decide to vote together. In that case, the total number of votes between the 3 of them would be all 8. It could be that just Abe and Ben decide to vote together. Between the 2 of them, they have 7 votes available. Maybe Abe and Condi will create a coalition. If they vote together, they have 5 votes available. Or it could be that Ben and Condi vote together and they would have 4 votes up for grabs. If Abe votes by himself, he has 4. If Ben votes by himself, he has 3. If Condi votes by herself, she has 1. Okay, since the quota is 5, in order to be a winning coalition, there must be 5 or more votes up for grabs. So our winning coalitions would be the first 3. Abe, Ben, and Condi, Abe and Ben, and Abe and Condi. These 3 coalitions have 5 or more votes, and therefore they denote a winning coalition. Now, a member of a winning coalition is said to be a critical voter for that coalition if the coalition is no longer a winning one when that voter is removed. So let's determine the critical voters for each of the 3 winning coalitions in example 3. Here we have our 3 winning coalitions, and we want to determine within each coalition who are the critical voters. We'll start with the coalition of Abe, Ben, and Condi. Remember that our quota is 5. So, if Abe were to leave the coalition and take his 4 votes with him, Ben and Condi would only have 4 votes remaining. They would not have enough votes to meet the quota, and therefore Abe is considered to be a critical voter. On the other hand, if Ben decides to leave the coalition, between Abe and Condi, 5 votes would still be up for grabs. They could still win without Ben, so Ben is not critical. Similarly, if Condi leaves the coalition because she only has 1 vote, Abe and Ben would have 7 remaining. They would still have enough to meet the quota, and so Condi is not critical. So in the coalition of Abe, Ben, and Condi, Abe was critical, but removing either Ben or Condi leaves at least 5 votes, so they are not critical. Okay, What about the coalition of Abe and Ben? If Abe leaves, Ben only has 3 votes left. He can no longer meet the quota, so Abe is critical. Similarly, if Ben leaves, Abe only has 4 votes. He can't meet quota by himself, so Ben is also critical. In the coalition of Abe and Ben are both critical. Finally, Abe and Condi. If Abe leaves, Condi only has 1 vote. She cannot meet quota, so Abe is critical. If Condi leaves, Abe does not have enough votes to meet quota by himself, so Condi is also critical. Now, a voter's Banzhaf Power Index is the number of times that voter is critical in some winning coalition divided by the total number of instances of critical voters. Let's go back to our example one more time and use our coalition table to determine the Banzhaf Power Index for each delegate. Here's our table, including our winning coalitions and the people that we determined to be critical voters for each winning coalition. Note that in total there were 5 instances of critical voters. Abe was critical 3 out of the 5 times, so his Banzhaf Power Index would be 3/5 or 60%. Ben was a critical voter once out of the 5, so his Banzhaf Power Index would be 1/5 or 20%. Condi was critical once out of the 5, so her Banzhaf Power Index would also be 1/5 or 20%. Okay, now let's look at an example involving political affiliations. So let's provide a voting power analysis on the orange district by political affiliation. We're going to assume that Democrats, Republicans, or Independents vote in blocks, and the Independents vote for either the Republican or Democratic candidate. All right, let's start by seeing how many we have of each party. Adding the number of people who are Democrats, we see that there are a total of 7. For Republicans, there are 8, and Independents, there are 3. So there are a total of 18 voters. If our quota is a simple majority, quota then would be 10. We would take 18 and cut it in half, which would be 9. We've got to go a little over half, so a little more than 9 would be 10. Okay, let's create our table. Remember, there were 7 Democrats, 8 Republicans, and 3 Independents. Here we have each of the possible coalitions, and let's determine the total number of votes. So there's our total number of votes for each coalition. Since our quota is 10, our winning coalitions would be the top 4. These have 10 or more votes among them up for grabs. Now, who are the critical voters within these winning coalitions? Notice we only have to compute critical voters for winning coalitions. So in our first coalition of Democrats, Republicans, and Independents, if Democrats leave, Republicans and Independents still have 11 votes available. They can meet quota, so Democrats are not critical. Similarly, if Republicans leave, between Democrats and Independents, there would be 10 votes. They could meet quota, so Republicans are not critical. And if Independents leave, Democrats and Republicans have 15 votes, so Independents are not critical. There are no critical voters in that first coalition. In the second coalition, if Democrats leave, Republicans cannot meet quota, so Democrats are critical. If Republicans leave, Democrats can't meet quota, so Republicans are critical. Similarly, in our third coalition, Democrats and Independents are both critical. And finally, in the coalition of Republicans and Independents, Republicans and Independents are both critical. If either one left the coalition, there would not be enough votes remaining to meet quota. In total, there were 6 instances of critical voters. So let's compute the Banzhaf Power Index for each political party. Democrats were critical 2 out of the 6 times, so their Banzhaf Power Index is 2/6 or 33%. Republicans also were critical 2 out of the 6 times, as were independents. So in this particular district, we would think of the power as being equally dispersed among the 3 political parties. All right, let's look at one final example. Here we're going to provide a voting power analysis on the green district. You can count that there are 13 Democrats, 7 Republicans, and 4 independents within the green district for a total of 24. Quota then as a simple majority would be 13, a little over half. Here is our table. We would determine the total number of votes for each coalition. Because quota is 13, a winning coalition is any coalition with 13 or more votes. So here are the winning coalitions. We then determine the critical voters within each coalition. There are 4 instances of critical voters, all Democrats. So the Banzhaf Power Index for the Democrats would be 4 out of 4, or 100%. For Republicans and independents, they were never a critical voter out of the 4. So their Banzhaf Power Index would be 0%. So in this particular district, we would be able to see that the Democrats would have all of the power and Republicans and independents would have none. Now, some states such as California require that districts not favor or discriminate against an incumbent candidate or political party. Requiring that a district not favor a political party means that the election in each district should be competitive among parties. For competitive elections, the goal is to limit the power of partisan coalitions. In a competitive district, both parties should have a nearly equal chance of winning an election. The other alternative, partisan districting, creates safe districts for certain politicians and parties. That is, districts where a certain entity is extremely likely to win an election. A good example of partisan districting is Pennsylvania's congressional districting after the 2010 census. In 2012, Democratic congressional candidates received a little over 50% of the votes cast, but captured only 5 of Pennsylvania's 18 seats in the U.S. House of Representatives. By packing Democratic votes into a small number of districts following the 2010 census, Pennsylvania's Republican-controlled legislature ensured that 49% of the vote would yield Republicans 72% of Pennsylvania's representation in the House. Now, this is an example of Republicans behaving badly, but don't worry, it happens on both sides of the aisle. So what do you think? Should districts be competitive, or should there be safe seats for certain parties? An initial thought might be that it's always good for every district to be competitive, and maybe you're right. But there's also an argument to be made for ensuring safe seats, for ensuring that at the table, each political party will always have someone there to represent their interests. What do you think? On average, how closely should the ratio of elected officials, Democrat to Republican, match the ratio of registered voters for those parties? Finally, let's go back to Squareville. Remember that previously you assumed the role of a citizens redistricting committee. You created 6 districts that have approximately the same number of people, so 23 to 26 people per district, and you had to make sure that every district was contiguous, meaning connected. Squares in a district must share a side with another square in the same district. We cannot have isolated squares or squares that only touch at a corner be in the same district. Well, now political affiliations have been revealed for Squareville. So the idea is to redistrict Squareville with the goal of either competitive or partisan elections. If your goal is partisan elections, you want to try to maximize the number of safe districts for one party or another. Remember that your 6 districts must have approximately the same number of people, 23 to 26, and each district must be contiguous, meaning connected. Once you have your districting done, you can provide a voting power analysis on each district by political affiliation. In other words, compute the Banzhaf Power Index for Democrats, Republicans, and Independents within each of your 6 districts. Now keep in mind this activity for Squareville is one we would have done in class together given the opportunity. For now, it's something for you to do if you have the interest and time available. Thanks so much, guys. Bye.